Hello everyone and welcome back to another World of Warcraft video. Today we're going to be talking about the bombshell that Blizzard just dropped. It is a 25% increase across the board to player health and also the player damage taken. So we're going to be discussing the impact of this, especially when it comes to our ability to self-heal, right? And then we're also going to be talking about the class tuning that just came in as well for Devastation Evoker. It looks like they're trying to make Firestorm a thing yet again. Whether or not it ends up being a thing, obviously we'll have to wait and see. I have a lot of insights and a lot of stuff I want to share with you, and I'm excited to do that. But first, I want to talk about today's sponsor. So today's video is sponsored by me. I'm sponsoring the video. I want to talk to you about Medify. So if you haven't already checked it out, Medify is a website you can use for coaching. So if you're looking for like a one-on-one kind of angle to get, a leg up on your peers, maybe you just don't really have the time to, watch YouTube videos or go through Wowhead and figure out how to play a class, right? If you're looking for mage or evoker coaching, definitely go check out my Medify page. The website link is mfy.gg/@preheat. The link will be down in the description below. It'll also be up in the top right of the screen. Hopefully this isn't flipped. It's one of these two corners. Anyways, if you use the discount code Preheat-25, you'll get 25% off your first coaching session. So definitely go check that out. And this link is only available for the first 10 people. So once the first 10 use the discount code, obviously it's going away. But anyways, enough about that. Let's talk about the news. All right, so we have another blue post, and Blizzard is stating that they are just going to increase both player stamina and enemy damage by 25%. This is very similar to the change that we had at the very end of beta that was the 40% adjustment, right? And the aim is kind of the same idea, right? They say when damage mitigation abilities and healing are too strong relative to player health, the only way to threaten players is to make enemy damage very high and spiky. Enemies have to be turned to have the capacity to do burst damage that kills players before healers can react. That isn't very satisfying gameplay, and the increasing player health gives players more time to react to incoming damage and makes player choices about cooldowns and mana management more meaningful. So this is a good change overall. Like, I'm very happy with this change. Obviously, last time they did it, right, with the 40% one, there was a lot of unintended consequences, though. Like, across the board, if you had healing that wasn't percentage-based, it was basically a nerf to you, right? Like, even if you weren't a healer, even if it was just like your Verdant Embrace, even if it was just your Panacea, right, in the talents, it was nerfed. And obviously they've been working to kind of fix these problems, right, throughout the expansion. We just had our Verdant Embrace buff, like, in 10.0.7, 25% to kind of make up for some of that, but we never quite got back to where we were previously. This time around, though, it looks like they're actually making some considerations. So if we scroll down to Evoker, you'll notice Mage is absent from these news, right? Because Mage healing is percentage based, right? And obviously Mage is perfect, so there's no tuning needed for mages, right? Anyways, for Devastation Evoker, though, Living Flame healing increased by 25%, Emerald Blossom healing increased by 25%, Verdant Embrace healing increased by 25%, and Panacea healing increased by 25%. So basically, they are preemptively buffing our healing to accommodate this loss that we would be having, right? This is very good because last time they forgot to do this, and it just nerfed our healing a lot, which felt really bad. But that is not all that's changed here. You'll notice that we have 4 other entries. So it looks like they are trying to make Snapfire more appealing, trying to make Firestorm more appealing. So Feed the Flames is the new talent that we have in 10.1. This basically makes it so that after we cast a certain amount of pyres, our next pyre will explode to a Firestorm. It's essentially a Firestorm talent, right? Because it does interact with the other talents like Raging Inferno, where pyre will deal increased damage during Firestorm. Basically, this talent was a little bit overtuned at 12, so they're nerfing it down to 9 pyres. The problem, though, is that this talent is hard to get. It's out of reach, right? Because for some reason, for some really strange reason, we have to go from Firestorm to Raging Inferno or Snapfire, and then we have to go to Imminent Destruction, a Deep Breath talent, and then we can go to Feed the Flames. I don't understand why they didn't reevaluate the pathing here, right? Like, if you're going to redo the tree, if you're going to change how the tree is organized and what the abilities do, you have to consider how the pathing is working. And it really does not make sense here on the left side, right? Like, and it starts from the top, like Volatility to Firestorm. It makes absolutely no sense that I have to go from this AoE talent Volatility to this choice node with Living Flame, right? Like, I don't know what this has to do with AoE. And now we go down to Firestorm, which is our AoE talent. Like, why isn't there a direct path from Volatility down to Firestorm? The issue with Firestorm, actually, there's a couple issues, but one of the main issues with Firestorm is how the pathing is just so screwed up on the left side of the tree here, okay? Obviously, there's other things too that are really, really great coming in the patch. I don't want to be too doomer on this because obviously we're looking up, right? Like, things are looking great. Evoker is saved. The talents, we're very happy with the new talents and the new design for causality, right? This is just like, it's fantastic, right? But still, I have some issues. I have some issues with this, right? Looking at the AoE talents, it really does not make sense why volatility is not linked with Firestorm. It just defies logic, right? So there should be a connection from volatility to Firestorm, just like there should be a connection from this choice node down to Feed the Flames. It only makes sense, right? And then another one that really just doesn't make sense, since we're on the topic of connections, is there's no connection from Eternity Span to Charge Blast. You're never going to take 2 of 2 Honed Aggression, right? So like the left side here is just irrelevant, which basically forces us to either take Eye of Infinity or Event Horizon to be able to reach Charge Blast. I feel like this doesn't really make sense. So yeah, a direct path here would be nice. And obviously, you know, being able to skip Power Swell, I would love to be able to just not have to take this talent, right? It sucks. Would much rather get a direct path, but that one's less of an issue. I'd say the biggest issue right now is just on the left-hand side. This whole part right here, volatility, the Engulfing Blaze, to Firestorm, to Raging Inferno, to Imminent Destruction, to Feed the Flame. It's just far too expensive, and it really just doesn't make sense. And it's going to stifle our builds, right? Like, it's going to basically make it so that in order to go like a Firestorm build, you have to give up a lot. And that's just the first problem with Firestorm. There's actually so many issues with this talent. Ground abilities in general in World of Warcraft have an issue, right? Like, there's not really a place in the current design for how Mythic Plus and Raid is done where you can have a ground effect that can last a long time and enemies actually just stand there and get damaged, right? So examples of ground effects, they're still like very much a thing, right? You've got like Earthquake, you know, you've got Blizzard, obviously, which slows enemies in the last 8 seconds, right? You've got Rain of Fire, which is also an 8-second one, right? But Firestorm is 12 seconds long. This thing is such a long duration for it to deal its damage, right? And it's small. It's so small. Look how small Firestorm is. I'm going to cast it here on this mill target dummy. Look at this. It barely touches the other two, okay? Where is there ever a scenario in a Mythic Plus setting where you're going to have mobs stay in a circle this small for 12 seconds straight, right? Like with detonating seeds going off, with the million swirlies that are happening, with the fact that tanks are constantly moving, you know, from one pack to another. There's just so many frontals, so many things on the ground, so many issues in mechanics, and there's thundering happening, there's quaking happening, there's all this other crap. It's all happening at the same time. Obviously, some of those affixes are going away in the patch, but I'm just saying, like, with the current design of Mythic Plus, it really just doesn't make sense to have an AoE circle that's this small that you have to keep enemies in, especially if it's going to be lasting 12 whole seconds, right? And it doesn't even slow the enemies that are in it. Okay, so yeah, I have a problem with Firestorm. I don't think that Firestorm is really realistic, right? Like, even if it deals good damage, theoretically, let's assume that it does good AoE damage, right? It still is just such a small circle, and it doesn't follow the mobs. And it's not really practical, right? Like, you're not going to find a tank that's able to constantly keep your mobs in it. And even if you do, it's probably going to slow you down in other ways. So I just feel like the design of Firestorm has a problem because it doesn't chase the mobs. I would much rather see Firestorm be something like Ravager, right? Like, Warrior Ravager actually follows the mobs as it goes. And, you know, so either we need Firestorm to be a shorter spell that deals its damage much quicker, and maybe it has a larger, you know, circle by default, or we need it to maybe snap to the mob, right? Whichever mob is closest to it, or follow the pack. I don't know exactly what it needs, but the way it is right now, the implementation, it feels really bad because mobs just run out of it. It also feels bad because the cast is just very long, right? Like, it's a very long cast. Look at how long it takes to actually get Firestorm off, right? Especially if you're in your cooldowns, you never really feel like there's a good time to cast it, and it never really feels good to cast. And there's some ways to fix this, obviously. Like, you can go Snapfire, which makes it instant cast, but this procs off of Living Flame, right? And Living Flame is not something that we want to be really using in AoE at all, right? So like, it kind of defies the logic again. Like, why does Snapfire proc from Living Flame? Why isn't all red damage proccing Snapfire, right? Like, if you're gonna have the ability proc off of damage, it should be AoE damage, because that's kind of the whole point of Firestorm, is it's an AoE ability. And then the alternative, right, Raging Inferno, makes it a much bigger radius, right? But it still runs into the problem of it's just such a long cast, and it really doesn't feel like you're getting much out of it, because the time you spent getting that extra 25%, sorry, I have to correct myself, it's 20% increased damage, they nerfed it, damage on your pyre, you could have just generated more pyres, right? Like, and that will probably do more damage overall. So it feels bad to press, enemies constantly run out of it, it takes a lot of talents to get, but let's just put all of that aside, and let's assume that this talent is actually good. In fact, you know, let's explore how good this talent actually might be. So I ran some sims, ignore the PS1 Hagrid here, I ran some sims earlier, and I do have some builds in here that are actually impossible to do in the game. I've basically hacked the talents to make combinations that you normally can't get. So in this example, what we're comparing everything against is like a baseline of just like an AoE build that has no iridescence or power swell. Okay, so basically it's this build right here. And you would either go like iridescence, power swell with these last 2 talents, right? Or you would put them somewhere else. So the question is, where is the best place for us to put these talents? And I'm just going to assume that we are able to go directly from volatility to Firestorm just for science, right? We'll just do it for science. So in this setup, this is what it's shaped up to be. This is a 5-minute sim, right? So going from no iridescence, no power swell, and everything else exactly the way it is right here, right? Where we've got volatility and everything else is just like single target talents. Adding in Onyx Legacy is a pretty small gain. Engulfing Blaze is a 1% gain. Charge Blast is 2%. Adding in Imminent Destruction and Feed the Flame ends up being a 4.7% gain. And then here's where it gets really interesting. So adding in Firestorm Snapfire, right, or Firestorm Raging Inferno, both of these are around a 6% gain. However, like I said, you can't do this, right? Like you can't go directly from Volatility to Firestorm. There's no connection there. And look at this, we actually have better combinations. And these are combinations we can actually do. So if you look here, the top one is Fallen Magic Everburning Flame. So that would be putting these last 2 talents right here. This is the best AoE setup. And then below that, we have Power Swell Iridescence, right? This is like more of a single target build. So thinking about Mythic Plus, right? Mythic Plus isn't just about AoE, it's also about single target. So let's look at what single target would look like. So here are the same talent builds using my character. And this is single target. So in single target, compared to like a full single target build, we only lose 1.7% damage if we go Power Swell Iridescence. So this setup right here, which was the second best one, right? Remember, it was very close, tied actually, pretty much here. This one that's tied in AoE for best is also the best in single target. But then let's look at the Firestorm examples, right? So Firestorm Snapfire is down here. It's a 4% loss. And then, you know, even down below this, we have Firestorm Raging Inferno, 5.5%. So yeah, basically the takeaway is that even if you had a direct path, which we don't, right? Like you still probably wouldn't take Firestorm. And here's the big takeaway, right? This is assuming that targets aren't even moving. Like we aren't even accounting for mobs running out of the Firestorm, right? So like once you put that into the equation too, then you just realize that like there's really no reason to ever go Firestorm. Like this is just a really bad talent, right? Like it's bad numerically. It is, there's no real way to path to it like you would want to, right? And on top of that, even under the best scenario where we have a direct path from Volatility to Firestorm and we're able to get those talents in with our AoE build and, you know, everything is looking great for us, even under that circumstance where the mobs are completely still, you still wouldn't take it, right? So that's not realistic. Obviously, mobs are going to move. So you can only assume that it's going to get worse from there, right? So even in the best case scenario, it's not competing with Iridescence. So I don't think it is a stretch to say that Firestorm is just a trash talent and it's still dead. And you know what, honestly, I think that they're looking at the wrong things to fix. And it makes me a little worried too, right? Because like if we go back to the patch notes, they are also nerfing some of the other talents to try and make Firestorm more enticing, right? Like they're nerfing Shattering Star, they're nerfing Scintillation. I can only assume that this is like part of the same change that they're trying to make Firestorm a thing with, right? Like this is the wrong approach. Like nerfing our talents that are good to try and make us pick up the talent that we aren't picking up, it's not gonna work, right? Like there's too many other problems with this talent, right? Like if you're gonna make Firestorm a talent that's like so good that it's worth taking, like you really have to evaluate how the talent plays and like realistically like what it's actually doing, right? Because even if you keep buffing Firestorm to the point where we finally eventually are forced to take an AoE, right? Because it's just too good, it still has those obvious flaws with it, right? So I have a big problem with this talent. I don't think Firestorm is really a good talent. I think the design on it is very weak, and I really hope that they reevaluate how Firestorm is and also how the pathing works for it, right? Because there are just so many issues with it, and like working on it from this direction where you're like nerfing the blue spells, I feel like this is just not the right approach for it. So I mean, maybe I'm reading too much into this. Maybe this is just like tuning for single target, right? And it's just completely unrelated to Firestorm, but I feel like there's probably some correlation here, right? Because the biggest competition, right, between Firestorm and AoE is going to be your Shattering Star. Those are the talents you would give up to pick it up. So I don't think that that's a coincidence. Anyways, what do you think about these new talents? Do you want to see Firestorm played? Would you like to see Firestorm maybe changed in some way? let me know in the comments below what your ideas are. And yeah, hopefully we get more information here. I mean, even if nothing changes, I'm still pretty happy with where Devastation Evoker is, even if I don't play Firestorm right. But you know, it could always be better, right? Like we could always be better. We could always have more access and more variety in our AoE builds. So yeah, definitely looking forward to 10.1. I think our AoE is really good and single target's gonna be really good. But you know, the class overall still has, you know, obvious flaws, and hopefully those will be addressed at some point. But anyways, if you like this video, be sure to give it a like. And if you want to see more of my content, be sure to subscribe to the channel, ring that notification bell, and hopefully I see you in the next one.